My name is Randall Walker. I'm an Entrepreneurship Facilitator, and welcome to this exciting feature EntrepreneurFEST event with Collette Dinnigan, AO. I would like to acknowledge that this virtual meeting is taking place across the vast traditional country of Indigenous language groups, and on behalf of all of us, I would like to offer our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. What a privilege it is to have Collette Dinnigan, AO, with us for EntrepreneurFEST. Collette is an entrepreneur, iconic Australian fashion designer, interior designer, and author. She's won many awards, including Leading Women Entrepreneurs of the World Award, Louis Vuitton's Business Award, Australian Designer of the Year, Australian Fashion Laureate Award, and has been inducted into the Design Institute of Australia Hall of Fame, which is a wonderful deserved recognition. Collette has been awarded the Officer of the Order of Australia, and she's been recognised in the Australian Legends series when Australia Post put her image on a stand. She's been featured in an iconic American Express campaign and has been a special guest editor for Vogue Living, and is of course part of Celebrity MasterChef 2021. So let's kickstart EntrepreneurFEST 2021, take it into overdrive now, and welcome Collette Dinnigan, who has generously given her time to help entrepreneurs around Australia push through the challenges of COVID and be motivated in relation to getting ready for the boom. So Collette, welcome. You wrote a book about your life and being a fashion designer. It was aptly titled Obsessive Creative. Do you tend to see everything through your designer's mindset?
Thank you for having me, first of all. I guess, you know, I am to my husband, I'm a very irritating person into my family, because I can walk into a room and I almost constantly readjust it and rebalance it or want to rehang pictures and change the colors. So I guess it's just innate in me, and that's part of what I do. I mean, I'm not very good at remembering dates and timelines, I guess. It's much more about the feeling, and my instinct sort of always kicks in. So yes, I do.
Fantastic. And did anyone try and discourage you early on from pursuing a career in fashion design?
Oh, my father, he was the first person to say, what on earth are you doing? My mother was, do follow your heart, follow your instincts. And my father was very much, you know, you could be anything. You could be a lawyer, you could be, you know, a great business person. You've got, you know, the marks at school. And my first love was to be a vet or a marine biologist. But, you know, I did love textiles and art. And so I decided, my mother was very much an influence on me too, because she was very creative, and I decided to follow my heart, which, you know, I'm very glad I did. But there you go. Instinct, so important.
That's fantastic. And was there an incredible piece of advice that someone gave you early on or along the way that has served you well throughout your career?
I can remember once speaking to Rupert Murdoch, and he said to me, Collette, don't try and avoid taxes. The more tax you pay, the more money you make. So I looked at tax in a very different light after that, because it's true. It's very much about, you know, I think for me, I always started small, but I set up to be big, but not big in a commercialized way, but having proper systems in place and making sure that, you know, it could be picked up, my business, at any time, or it could be audited, or, you know, I guess I'm a very honorable person in that sense, and I want to be correct and do everything properly. So I think, you know, it's really important to always start something with the idea that it is going to be bigger. And I think that's what motivates most people, is the growing process. It's not where you get to, it's how you get there, and setting up the systems in the beginning is very important, because you need other people to come in and take over at the, you know, the more kind of, I guess, the administrative side of the business. And I've seen some people have had amazing ideas, but they just haven't been able to pull through when it's grown too much, because administration's been a nightmare.
Wow. And again, you know, thank you for being present here today. Really, we know that your time and your insights are going to help entrepreneurs around Australia dealing with these challenging times and changed economic conditions in relation to COVID. Was there a moment in your career where you hit a roadblock and you had to motivate yourself to persevere and push through? Is there anything that you might be able to share with entrepreneurs at the moment?
There's been many times. I think there's been many highs and many lows. And I can remember when I first founded my company and my business, it was in the early 90s, and suddenly there was one of the biggest recessions Australia had ever had. Instead of looking at it as a negative, what ended up happening was that retail stores there were so many stores available, rents went down. And so I guess for a small business, it's kind of, you have a lot more opportunity and prices aren't as high. So I saw that recession as perhaps it wasn't about growing my customer base, but it was about securing, rental agreements and things at a much lower price, and having materials, having accessibility to services that I guess were much more reasonable. And another time is, I can remember when the Lehman Brothers, when all that came crashing down in America, and oh my goodness, that was such a nightmare for us, because we were selling to 150 stores around the world: Barney's, Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf's, Neiman's, and my customer was that banking customer, the wife of, and so suddenly none of the stores wanted to stock the brand, or any brand actually, or they wanted to return stock. And for a little Australian company, it was the biggest nightmare ever. And I ended up bringing it back and doing proper stock takes myself. I didn't get anybody else to do it because it was my money, and I knew if I was either going to be in credit or not get paid, or I needed to control it. And I brought most of it back into Australia and decided to keep all the special pieces as an archive, for when the market would change. And I also set up another brand called Collette by Collette Dinnigan, and made it much more affordable, but it was the essence of the mainline brand. And the stores picked it up very quickly, and I used my credits in that area. And so we created another business. And over time, the mainline came back, and so did banking, and so did the whole world. But it was just, I think, about being quite quick to react and not blaming anyone, and just seeing what you can do with what you have. And I think, through the COVID time, my skills with technology and online aren't so great. I'm a different generation, but there's a lot of people who do have those skills, is to actually not look at the negatives, is to actually find something that's small and something that you're good at and that you can focus on. It's not something you always want to put away until another rainy day. It's, now's the rainy day, now's the time to experiment and find things you're passionate with, a good idea, and in a small way take it to the world. And you're able to do that with technology now, whereas I had to literally get on an aeroplane or send faxes with the old-fashioned fax paper that would fade, or put it in the post. It's but time makes, and technology make everything so much more practical and able, I think, now.
That's fantastic. I think there's some wonderful anecdotes for overcoming adversity. We often talk about left brain logic and right brain creativity in business, and in particular in entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are renowned for having an active right brain, where they draw on creative problem solving and lateral thinking. You're also renowned. You have a strong reputation for having attention to detail. How do you reconcile the balance of left brain and right brain thinking in your approach to business?
I think, I talk about it a lot, and I probably will repeat myself, so excuse me through this. It's, you've got to trust your instinct, and creatively, with whatever I do, it's my instinct. And I always think it's never good enough, but I think it's better to get it started than to not finish, and to actually get on with it and do the job. And I think if you're true to yourself and using your instinct, there is a commercial side that you have to realize, and if it's the boring side, but you've got to address it, and you've got to do the equations. It's like petty cash receipts, I can't think of anything worse. But in order, you can see where you're spending your money, and you can get people, if you keep systems in place to show you your profits and losses, and where you are spending too much money. And I think, my time, when I'm working on things, it's basically, there is so much time that there's no value you can put on it. So I don't actually ever put that into the equation, because that's me, and that's the brand, and that's the building of something. But you need to be able to put everything else, the costs in that are real, because you can't, go on without paying it. But so I've had to learn really the hard way that I wasn't given any money. The banks didn't support me in the early days. There was a lot of issues and problems. So I had to be able to turn over cash in order to pay for the materials. So I guess I was forced to it very early start, and it's important, you know, you can't just push it away.
I think that's wonderful inspiration for entrepreneurs today, because I'm sure, as you know, there's no such thing as a business loan anymore. An entrepreneur can't go in and meet with the bank manager and have a business plan and get an unsecured business loan. You know, it's very hard to start a business. So I think it's great inspiration that you've shared that you were able to do it under your own steam. Is there a single moment, perhaps early in your career, maybe a first big order, where you recall thinking the business is now definitely viable? And the reason I ask, we have a lot of entrepreneurs online that are perhaps employed full-time or part-time, and they've got their business as a side hustle. They're trying to transition into creating their new business, or they might be, you know, currently unemployed. Was there a single moment that you recall where you felt, I now have a viable business?
Yes, well, I guess taking my shop lease. I mean, I lived above my shop, and in the early days, I did the sewing. Well, I did the designing, the pattern making, the cutting, the sewing. I did the sales in the shop. I did my accounts. I did absolutely everything. So I didn't have any costs except for the materials that I would buy. And I think that's really important, because also you get to know your business and you get to know how to cut something or what the problems are. And when you do employ people and they say that can't be done, which I often would get, I'd say, yes, it can, I'll show you how. But I think, you know, when Joyce Ma walked into my shop, in my little shop in William Street in Paddington, she had a great store in Hong Kong called, I think, yeah, it was Joyce. And she said, oh my God, I have never seen anything like these clothes. I'd love to place a big order. And she thought I was going to be, you know, the next big thing in the world, which she had a lot of faith in me. And, you know, I couldn't actually make all the clothes myself. So I had to start employing people and to help me sew, and I still did the cutting, and to help, you know, do the books, and then in retail to do the sales. So it did start with a big order from her. And from that, I guess, and selling to Barney's in New York, they acted as showrooms. So all the other stores would visit these stores, Joyce in Hong Kong, Barney's in New York, and start seeing that I was there. And then they started approaching me. So it was really a turning point in my life when she came into my little store in Paddington and placed a big order and flew me to Hong Kong to do a trunk show. And she really believed in me, you know, and it was fantastic to be so suddenly recognized, as though the light just went on.
How totally fantastic. And in terms of goal setting, could I just ask you, I think your experience and perhaps insights that you could share with entrepreneurs. Again, it's a very challenging marketplace at the moment, structural changes to the economy. I think we would all acknowledge that customer or consumer behavior has probably changed forever. Do you have any advice about setting goals for emerging entrepreneurs?
Well, I guess whatever, you know, when I started with something I was passionate about, you know, making lingerie and out of silks, and there wasn't anything in the marketplace. So I don't think, unless you have, you know, an interruption kind of a model, which isn't what would be suggesting or good at, you know, you need to go in there with something that the market's lacking, and it's either a service or it's technology or it's a creative, something that people want. And COVID, you know, we've seen online now how so many of the chefs have been struggling with their restaurants, but they've reinvented themselves through Providore websites or having meals delivered and online cooking shows. And that's what I think we have to do is we need to still connect emotionally. People, no one just wants to shop online all the time. You need to have interaction and have feedback, and I think, so whatever you do, you have to be able to do it and be able to know that you're going to be doing it 24/7. So you have to love it and always keep on improving it. You cannot be doing something that somebody else has done that you don't really love and you're not passionate about, but you think it's going to be better, because you'll lose interest, and the brand or the product or the service will show that.
And in terms of moments where the struggle is totally worthwhile and your decision and your vision and your passion has been vindicated, you've had so many achievements and highlights and awards we touched on earlier. You have been a pioneering Australian designer on the world stage. Is there a milestone that represented an immense sense of job satisfaction for you? For example, being the first Australian designer to mount a full-scale ready-to-wear collection in Paris in 1995, Was that something akin to a childhood dream come true for you?
You know what? I've never really dreamed of those milestone moments. I think I've just been too busy working to get there. And I think, I sort of say to most people, most of my life and work, I was so busy, I never got the fabulous offers of come to this party or go there or come away for the weekend. I was always working. Whereas now I perhaps have less time, but now I'm working on the family and the children and Zoom calls. And it's a different time. But I think that definitely for me was a milestone. The fatigue after the show, the adrenaline of those weeks leading to it, and learning so much about how to put on a show. I had absolutely no idea. And that show came out of the stores I sold to, like Harvey Nichols and Barney's, and everybody saying to me, Collette, you should be showing in Paris and you should have a showroom there rather than coming to New York and LA and London and traveling the world selling the collection. We'll come to you in Paris. We always go there. And it sort of started out of perhaps not a dream, but out of a necessity and practicality for the buyers themselves and the press, because that's what really doing a show is for. It's for the press to see the new collection and for the buyers to see how it's worn and how you have a vision. It's not just to do a show. So it is part of a very big business plan, I think, for all stores. And they then edit the collections as to what they like and what they think fits in with their edit for the season. So you're not always guaranteed, applause by the press or big orders by the stores. So, it's very touch and go, but definitely that first show was, I did it. I'd finished a show that was good or bad, whether people liked it or they didn't. I had actually not just talked about it, I had got there and done it. And that's what I think a lot of people need to do, is not just talk about things. There's a little bit of that, but you've got to get excited, but you've got to get out, give it a go.
And your efforts totally paid off. The year after, you were invited to show at the iconic Paris Fashion Week. I'm assuming it's an extraordinary opportunity. Was it stressful? Were there pressures? You wanted to make a positive impression. Would you be able to share what the emotional journey was like in the lead up to that fabulous, amazing opportunity?
Well, I guess what happened was after my first show was in Paris at Angelina's in 95, but then the Chambre Syndicale, which is the body, the couture, they invited me because the press had been talking about the brand enough to say, not going to the other shows. And I think it was Comme des Garçons and Sonia Rykiel. They were saying, there's this new designer and the press are going to her show. We need to, you need to give her a slot in a sense, because the press, you don't want to lose press to another show. And I was showing off calendar. And so they invited me and gave me a very prestigious slot. I think it was always before Louis Vuitton, except for we would never get the models because, so I was always, it was another challenge. I had to then use all the younger up and coming, never done a show before models. And, there's always a challenge to everything, but it gives you an edge as well, because you've got to be, anything that's too vanilla or that's too prescribed, that's always been done before, you've got to have a different take on it. And I think, I was providing a freshness of clothes from an Australian Antipodean sort of point of view, and people were interested. They really were back then. So, I was very lucky that it wasn't, probably the technology was much more limited. There wasn't social media, there wasn't Instagram. So in a way, I really was a discovery, whereas now everything's kind of discovered before it even happens. I think sometimes it moves so quickly.
And you were absolutely welcomed onto the world stage. Your designs were embraced. How would you describe the Collette Dinnigan style? So many people, so many commentators, fashion critics have written so many things about you. In business, we talk about a business's unique selling point or points of difference. How would you describe the Collette Dinnigan style?
I think it's very feminine. And for me, it's always so important to make women feel good and clothes that are cut well and make them feel confident. That was always been very important, but I think it's also, there was a very fresh take on lace. And so, I was often called the lace queen, or, everything was always about, beading or embroideries and things. And that's what I did, is that I gave it a youthfulness and a vigor and a wit, and I was always very mindful. I kind of liked a masculine, feminine edge. And at that time, there was a lot of androgynous designers coming out of Belgium. And I think, people were just ready for a change. And in the beginning, because I was also doing underwear and became outerwear, you know, a lot of slip dresses, and Madonna wore my corset in one of her videos, and then it was a lot of layering, and it was quite different, and a very different approach to lace and silk prints and things that people had seen before, but not in the way I was doing them or cutting them, or, you know, the proportions and the colors. And I think it was that youthful femininity that really gave my brand, you know, its edge against a very kind of masculine world back then, or clothes were also particularly masculine.
And you breaking through onto the world stage, was that similar timing to Australian chefs being recognised around the world as offering, you know, wonderful fresh ingredients, fresh produce, and being fairly sort of genuine and authentic with the flavors in the dishes? Was there similar timing?
You know, I think perhaps that was, I mean, I've got a lot of great chef friends. In fact, Neil Perry collaborated with me once in Paris, and he cooked one of the most fantastic dinners for an after party. And the French or even the Americans, no one could believe, you know, the food that we had, and the wines that we drank from Australia. And but I think perhaps the chef kind of movement to me would have come much more around the Olympics, when suddenly Australia had, you know, was forefront of the world stage, and our chefs had a time then to really go for it, and for people to experience. And there is such a thing, you know, as Australian cuisine. And like what I was doing, there's a lot of freshness to it. It's a mixture, you know, of Asia, and maybe mostly Asian, I think, stands out, and Italian and Greek. And so it's sort of very that European Asian kind of take, reinvented with this freshness of flavor and quality of ingredients, I think blew people away. And so the chefs in themselves in Australia became huge celebrities and started opening restaurants around the world, and people would come to Australia for its food.
Yes. And Vogue Living, you know, talking about lifestyle, Vogue Living is an iconic quality magazine. You were invited to be a special guest editor. What did that involve? What did that entail?
Gosh, well, that came just at the time, I think, after my first year of living in Italy, because that was, you know, after closing my business, I wanted a very big change. And I think that's another thing that's important. Don't be scared of change. Change is good. It's what you don't know about it that can be good. And if things are going not so great, you can always move on or change it again, you know. So that's what we did as a family. We moved to Italy, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know anybody there. You know, very quickly we made friends, and I met a lot of other creatives, and had, you know, went on a very different journey. And out of that, you know, Vogue Living approached me and said, would you do an Italian issue for us? And it was so much fun. And Felix Forrest, a friend who's a French photographer, he, you know, we went on a journey through Italy together, and we photographed south coast, right down the bottom of the boot. We photographed right up far north of Milan, Venice, and there was so much content and so many different people. And I think, you know, Italy to Australians as well, there's a lot of likeness, because people are about food and family, but there's I don't know, it was something I wanted to show a different Italy to what a lot of people see, not just the Amalfi Coast, and, you know, a lot about the designers. And, you know, I think the Italians are incredible craftsmen, and they have great small businesses. So it's something that I think needs to be more celebrated. So it was a real honor to be asked to do it, and I hope I did it justice. You know, I think there's still so much more to learn and to be put in there, but it was exciting.
Your bridal collection was world famous. It was stocked in Barney's in New York and Brown's in London. You've designed some spectacular bridal gowns. Is there one that's more memorable for you than the others?
Look, I think the thing is, a lot of my gowns were off the rack, but the ones that were designed specially for people, they're very ethereal, and they're very elegant and very feminine, probably less pronounced or dramatic as a lot of other designers. But I did do one dress, and it was in the Powerhouse Museum's collection, and for Swarovski. And I can remember spending hours and hours, all days and months. I think we used something like 1,000 meters of silk tulle and so many different crystals, and it was all hand pleated and hand embroidered and put together. And it was kind of the dress that you would imagine running through a forest, and it was a bit disheveled, but a bit naughty, but still young and fun, but just that kind of the jewel that is imperfect, but there's something that attracts you, you know, that I guess that's that slight vintage feel, which a lot of my bridal dresses actually have. It's kind of drawing from that very feminine vintage era or from the past and adding something new.
And very quickly, can I just ask you, when a quality piece is commissioned and you're dealing with a high-profile client, what might be the time frame involved from beginning to end for, you know, a tailor-made garment?
6 months is a good time frame.
Okay.
3 months is very hurried, but if you've set up, but I couldn't do it now because I'm not set up. But, you know, it's all hands on deck because there's so much hand cutting. Everything I did, every piece of lace was hand cut in-house. I taught my cutters, everybody, we worked together and finding different ways to cut because every piece of lace was different and you have to join the patterns. So I've been, you know, it takes a lot of work because there's a lot of hand sewing, hand beading, hand cutting. And sometimes I would send pieces to India to have the designs hand embroidered there because we just couldn't do it here. We didn't have the craftsmanship in Australia. But yeah, 6 months is probably not too generous in time.
You've had huge success with a lingerie collection. And in entrepreneurship and innovation, we talk about is an entrepreneur inventing something for the first time or looking at an existing process and making it better. I imagine the lingerie market was reasonably competitive at the time. Did you see a gap in the market?
Oh, definitely. Like, I think even in my clothes, it's something, you know, a lot of what's available is often, it doesn't have the love. And, you know, I just wanted to make it fresh and more modern and add to it and work with the factories that had all the, you know, they were capable of making things that I couldn't make by hand. And especially in lingerie, it's good to know, you know, because everything in the beginning I was making by hand. So there was a lot I couldn't do. And actually it brings that kind of the lingerie, when I did my first collaboration with Marks and Spencer's called Wild Hearts, and I used Helena Christensen as a model, and she just had a baby 3 months prior. But it was, you know, I really enjoy working with companies that have, you know, the economic scale to be able to turn quantities out, but actually apply great design. And I think a lot of what you do is not necessarily, it's through a different set of eyes. It's through that sensibility I was talking about, through the instinct. You know, for me, it's a very feminine, fresh, modern take. And I like to always draw on a bit of retro, vintage or old lace or old buttons and have something old, but not necessarily that's just been pre-loved. And, you know, to reuse things, I hate waste, especially, but I think in finding ways to do things, if you do have a business and it's very bespoke and it's very known for, you know, its quality and perhaps it's not turning over money to make profit, a really good way is to actually align yourself with a like-minded company that does have that economy of scale, is able to use your design ethos and aesthetic and your packaging and to make it at a much more affordable price. Of course, not in a limited edition way, but have that sensibility. Like, even I worked with Aldi and I did the children's wear collections, and I think in the first day they sold $10 million at retail, and they were very affordable prices. But you know what? It's like, we can make children's clothes. They don't have to be in bad colors, only primary. We can have beautiful colors, a great print. We can use organic cottons. It's not that much more expensive, but it's about good design and proportion. And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at what you do and how, you know, what you do, how you commercialize it. And yes, it is about something. You're not reinventing yourself totally, but you're putting your trademark or your stamp. I mean, in technology, I'd say there's a lot of invention there because we're not taking on the past. What we're looking at is people's needs and what they don't have already and what you need to develop. So I think in technology, there's a lot of newness, but I think in, you know, design, it's essentially most people look at proportion and color and prints, and and how you're feeling at the moment. Are you feeling very bright and happy and carefree, or are we feeling very subdued and very monotone? Or and often it's the political climate and the economic climate we react to. And I don't necessarily think, if everything's down and out, we're looking suddenly we're wearing grey. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We look for pops of colour and things to make us feel good and happy and take us out of the gloomy grey days. So, and that's just naturally, I think, what happens. It's like, I don't know if you've ever noticed, like I used to, maybe yellow was my feature color in a collection in Paris. And suddenly I see all the other collections with yellow, and you're like, how do we know that yellow was the color of the season, a year and a half ago when we started doing our color swatches? And we all use different factories and we develop our own fabrics. It wasn't like bees suddenly came to mind, but how do we know? And I think it's about, maybe that time the economy was a bit down and was a bit gloomy, and you just want something to brighten it up, and it's all in your subconscious. Well, that's what I believe anyway. So it's instinct again.
You mentioned your Wild Hearts and Young Hearts labels. It's wonderful that you're able to make fashion accessible and affordable. Was that difficult to implement? People have a perception about high fashion and that it's expensive. Did you have to implement some innovations to make that come to reality?
Well, I just teamed with good manufacturers who saw my vision. And to be honest, it was exactly the opposite of that, because I wanted to make it very affordable, so people who could not afford, my silk dresses that were one of 20, or because each of my outfits or dresses or pieces of clothing I made were numbered, so you knew exactly how many there were made in the world. Whereas, okay, the swimsuits from Aldi, there might have been, you might go down to the beach and often you see, 10 little children running around in the same sort of print or swimsuit. However, it was very affordable and they were great designs. And that was exactly what it was about. It was economy of scale, taking, much greater quantity, but good design, brought down the price. And it's the extreme opposite of what my main line was, but it was about not criticizing bad design. It was about doing something about it and making it affordable.
And in terms of your interior design work, you've done some amazing projects. I'm passionate about the hospitality and tourism sector. And you were asked to design the luxury penthouse suites at Bannister's by the Sea, Mollymook. How do you approach a project like that?
Well, I guess it wasn't something I approached. It was, often I will tell people, and unfortunately I'm very honest, and it's to my detriment sometime. And Peter Cosgrove, and I say, you should do this and you should have that, and why do you do this? And he's like, oh, you don't know what guests are like. You know what? You would be changing that over. I'm like, no, if you do it properly, people will treat it with respect. And if you use good quality materials, they will. And he said to me, okay, you do it. You do the penthouse suite and see what you can come up with. And this is your budget, which was almost unrealistic. And to this day, I don't know what, 10 years later, whatever, they haven't had to change a thing. They've had the fabrics with dry cleaned or washed. Everything has been treated. The Carrara marbles still standing, all the tapware, everything. And he's like, yes, okay, you're right. It's, it was much more of a challenge about sort of comfortable, relaxing luxury by the sea with good quality, materials, and not sort of treating the customer like, oh, well, they're going to come in there and destroy everything anyway. So who wants to spend the money on it?
You are a part of Celebrity MasterChef 2021. Can we assume that you love cooking, and do you have time for cooking?
No, I love cooking, and I always have. And my parents, food's been a very big part of our life. I grow most of my own vegetables. We have our own eggs. I'm very resourceful. I've traveled the world eating in great restaurants, not necessarily fine dining restaurants. In Italy, I love the little trattorias, and in France the same, the bistros. It's not about eating in the finest. It's about the best quality food. And I've always cooked, and I guess Italy kind of heightened that with the produce that was available, particularly in lockdown. We had a very big vegetable garden, and the produce there was exceptional, and the seasonality of. And and I'm an olive oil person. I'm not a butter person. So all those years for me in France, the steak with butter was not, and I don't eat meat, was kind of not my diet. Yet being in Italy, there were so many vegetables, artichokes and porcini mushroom, and the seasons, and risottos and pasta. Really was my place. And sometimes we had to stop ourselves eating so much. Actually, we had to stop going out for lunch because you couldn't help have 2 courses. But no, so it's been a passion, and I got approached to do it, and I just thought, absolutely not. I'm very private, and I'm not a reality television person. I've never even seen MasterChef. I'd heard about it. And they just said, oh, look, it's going to be fun. It's going to be different as long as you can read a recipe. And I thought, actually, I'm not very good at that. I do have ADD, and I look at the pictures and I kind of invent it myself. But and when I got there, it was very different because it was like there was a clock happening. There was, it was crazy challenges that I would never have. Wasn't my, oh, let's get some tomatoes from the garden and roast them in the oven for 2 hours and push them through a strainer and have a great tomato sauce kind of cooking. So it was fun. The people were great, the judges were amazing, and it was one of the biggest challenges of my life, out of my comfort zone. So I'm glad I did it, but it was really out of my comfort zone.
Well, you love cooking, you grow your own vegetables, you've got international business interests, you're raising children. A lot of entrepreneurs run the risk of experiencing burnout. Can you offer some advice about striking that work-life balance?
Oh, there is no balance. So I don't know how you strike it. I don't have one. And I think, when you start in the beginning, often I started without children. So that's one, bonus, because that's where it tears me apart. It's like, what do you not give enough time to your children? But to be honest, I think back in the day, in the 60s, when I was born, the end of the 60s, my parents weren't there worried about, did they give enough time to me? We got books to read. We were thrown in the back of the car, we're sliding around without seatbelts, and then we're kind of, thrown up on a bed to go to sleep while they were having a dinner party. And then we're back again and, been put on a yacht sailing around the world with no communication. And so we can't, be too careful. We've got to teach our children anyway, when you're a bit older, your work commitments are very important, and your ethos. And I think having commitments to children is just as good as not. But on the other, if that gives you more of a balance, because you have to focus on family, whereas when you don't have that, it's only about work. But I do think you've got to stay healthy, and you can't, you've got to look after your fitness. And I did, I would run every day. I'd be Forrest Gump. I'd run in Paris. I'd run in New York. I would run all the time, and I kept my fitness up, which, was quite boring for me at the time. But I think that really does help, because the hours are extended and you can burn out, and you need to eat well, and you need to look after yourself, but not otherwise. As you get older, you put on weight, you lose your health, and if you don't have your health, you have nothing.
And in terms of entrepreneurs having a vision for their business to try and remain focused, business advisors will always say to an entrepreneur, you need to have a business plan. Prospective investors or lending institutions will want to see a business plan. At the core of a business plan, an entrepreneur is supposed to have a vision. Would you have any advice in terms of having a core sense of purpose or a vision for an entrepreneur?
Oh my God, that's the boring bit. That's that thing when I went to the bank and they said, you must have a plan. I was like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I think, it's like I said before, you need to start with systems, and you do need to I did a very basic accounting course, and I did have a ledger, and I would write it in, and I had my system with sticking down receipts and not putting them in a shoebox every day. So I didn't have to remember too much. But my plan was in my head, and I had little boxes I needed to tick. I didn't talk to too many people, because things would change. And I think a lot of people don't like change. And if they hear too much, it's like, oh, what are you doing now? Well, I thought you were doing this. And so my plan is always very much in my head. And sometimes, I will discuss it, but not with too many people, because, often as an entrepreneur, I'm very subjective, and I'm not, it's not black and white, and it does evolve, and it has to evolve, and you do make mistakes, and you've got to learn from them, and you've got to also allow yourself to be able to change and to not necessarily correct them, and also not make a point. Sometimes if you tell somebody an idea and you'll have a plan and it's there and it's not going to plan, but, out of, stubbornness, you think, well, I'm going to prove this point. Like, forget it, leave it behind, move on, change it. Don't worry about other people. Take the advice on board and listen as much as you can. Don't do the talking. I think people who put themselves out too much and do too much talking, they're not able to digest what good feedback is. And often it's talking to the quiet achievers, not the ones with the big and the loudest voices that roar. It's the ones that might actually just tell you something. You go, gosh, that's relevant. And it's just one little thing that makes a difference. And I think, that's probably some of the best advice I can give, is to actually listen to those in probably lesser roles, because they're the ones that have the quietest voices, and they probably make the biggest difference.
And I'm intrigued, you've mentioned financials a couple of times, and clearly you've made a choice to have your finger on the pulse of the financial performance of the business. Traditionally, with entrepreneurs and small business owners, the financials are their weakness. And a lot of small business owners don't have an overview of income and expenditure, and cash flow is obviously critical to manage in a business. Can you just speak about your clear view on the importance of an entrepreneur understanding the financials in their own business?
I guess because I started in my business in the 90s, when I said before there was a recession and I didn't have any backers. And a lot of the people I was up against in Paris, they all had backers. In fact, I was the only female-owned business that was 100% solely owned by a person. Everybody was with a company, or was very unusual. And so I had no choice really but to know what was going on, because it was my money and I wasn't being lent any money from the bank, because they actually said to me, what happens if you get married and have a baby? And, you couldn't say that now. But that was the fact. And so I had to learn a lot about it. And I always felt like, my one thing was, I need to sell this much to pay that much. So I always had a goal every day, whether it was $100 or $1,000, I need to have that. I didn't look at the 50 cents and the $2 and the whatever. And it just was always my safety net to break even. And I think that's a really important goal to have, is break even. And also there was so much, I guess, in that recession time, when I went to Europe, it wasn't happening there, but that was kind of the thing of, you're a musician or a designer. Oh, you don't know about the commercial side, you're a creative, and no, that's not right. Because I think what started happening in 2000 is businesses like Barney's and Saks, and that they wanted, suddenly the designer became their celebrities and their stars, and there was trunk shows. So you had to go there and attend, and there was a commercial side to being a designer. And I think the world has changed. You wear a lot of hats. You have to promote your own product, you have to commercialize it, you have to make it, you have to design it. And it's important, and it's ignorant to say, I don't know about that, because if you don't, you need to learn about it. You don't have to be good at it, but you have to have an understanding of it, a brief, an overview. So when there are problems, you can use it. You've got tools. When everything.
If we could impose on your experience for some practical advice, I think dress codes have certainly become more casual in recent years. I think often business attire for men now does not include a tie with their jacket or blazer. A lot of workplaces had introduced casual clothes Friday before the pandemic. Obviously, people are used to now wearing casual clothes, working remotely from home during lockdowns. When face-to-face business meetings resume, could you offer some advice on what is acceptable business attire? And I suppose this is within the context of an entrepreneur meeting with a prospective investor, a prospective business partner, a prospective new major client. With your experience and insight, what would appropriate business attire be in 2022?
Oh, look, I think, presentation is a lot, and also gives you confidence if you feel good in what you're wearing. But I always think, you need to be elegant. And if somebody was to, come to me, in the country wearing high heel shoes and sort of falling over the rocks, they would have no understanding of where they're about to work. However, if they were just to rock up in a pair of tracksuit, I would also think you're not making much of an effort for something that should be very important to you. But I do think, the Italians have a very good saying, if you're over 30 and you're wearing shorts, unless there's a very high probability of going swimming, do not wear shorts. And I think the men in Italy, and the women too, but especially the men, they have such a relaxed but very well-rounded and presentable way of dressing. And they're in a suit with a linen shirt in summer, and in winter it moves to cotton or wool. And I think it's important when you attend a meeting to present how you want to be seen. You know, if you're too casual and too sloppy, how is your work going to be? How are you going to follow up? And I think it's important to wear a suit jacket. And even for women, you know, you can wear a skirt and a sweater, or a skirt and a blazer. You don't have to be in a total suit, but it's about being elegant. And I think having that kind of, it's hard to say, about, it's not just elegance, it's about being a little bit formal, having a formality to it and making it important, because that's how you want to present your plan, present your business, present yourself. You need to be well kept, and that's how I see people all the time who don't look so well kept, and I think, oh my God, what does their house look like? You know, and I think it is a reflection. It doesn't necessarily mean that's how you work every day, but a first meeting, first impressions. And I think color is always important. I don't think going to a meeting all dressed in black is a great thing for, especially, you know, it's quite dark and it can sometimes send the wrong message, I think. But still, if you feel it's appropriate and you're in the middle of winter, maybe it works.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your time today. It's very generous of you. In closing, all of the entrepreneurs watching and listening, they would love, is there a golden piece of advice that you would be happy to share from your wealth of experience, national and international? Is there one piece of advice that you could offer to emerging entrepreneurs?
Well, you know, I think it's a collective, really. It's, as I've said before, you know, trust your instinct. Failure isn't about making a mistake. It's about how you use that and what you learn for it, and don't do it again. And I think some of the best people in the world, and some of the things, you know, I've had lots of failures and they've actually become productive because they've changed the way my business is. I've had to change systems, and so don't be scared, just try it. You must try it, work hard, and be prepared. You know, it shouldn't be like work, it should be like what you do. And if you feel like whatever you're doing is hard work, you're doing the wrong thing. So it should be enjoyable. You should feel like you never want to put it down, and you've got another idea and you want to keep on adding to it. So don't sort of chase something that doesn't make your heart sing. Of course, there's going to be hard times, but you know, you have to do something that instinctively makes you want to progress with it. So that's, I think, one of the most important, because you live with that idea or whatever business you have for a long time, and you don't turn the ideas over so quickly. You know, they have a life of their own, and you know, they do change, and you need to stick with it.
Thank you so much. I think that's positive and inspirational, and I know that your time today will have a life-changing impact on many of the entrepreneurs watching. Collette Dinnigan, it's been a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you very much.